Hello, hello, hello. Hello. Good evening, everybody. I'm Ben Derbyshire. I'm the president of the RIBA for the time being. And welcome to the RIBA and the changing face of architecture. That's it. Of course, you all know that this year marks the 25th year since the tragic murder of Stephen Lawrence and the 20th year since the foundation of the Stephen Lawrence Trust. And an amazing year it has been, I have to say, for all of us, and I'm sure for the Trust. For those of us who were lucky enough to be there at the astonishing service at St. Martin's in the Field, a truly amazing event with an absolutely stellar and mightily significant representation of the nation's political leadership and royal governance. It was an amazing, amazing evening, and it was an event, and it was a moment for Baroness Doreen Lawrence to reflect on her astonishing achievements since the murder. She described it as just a chapter in a very incomplete book. But what an extraordinary chapter, and what a spirit of gritty determination from Stephen's mother to get to the point that the Macpherson inquiry was able to publish a report which described the behavior of the Metropolitan Police as institutionally racist, and has given rise to an absolutely tectonic change in the way we understand these matters. So an extraordinary achievement, I'm sure you'll all agree. So tonight's event is co-curated by the 204 Design Collective, and afterwards we'll hear from Steam Down. You'll all be asked, I think, to turn your chairs around and look that way, because that's where the band is going to be playing. Tomorrow morning at London Design Junction there will be a breakfast and a conversation between Sarah Weir, the CEO of the Chief Executive of the Design Council, with Sonia Watson. And then later on, actually November the 29th, the RIBA will be hosting a fundraiser here at the RIBA with food by Anthony Cumberbatch, who's actually preparing your snack this evening, music by the extraordinary singer Gwynjay Allen from Sierra Leone, who is incidentally also an architect, and money can't buy prizes because we are aiming to raise £25,000. The tickets, for those of you who can afford them, will be expensive, but they are in a good cause, and all of the money raised from those will go to the Trust. So we look forward to that as we look forward to the rest of this evening. It's my honor to be the host for it. I think we should, if you don't mind, give up a big round of applause to the organizers of this evening, Diane Small, the team at the RIBA and RIBA London region, the events team at RIBA, to 204 Design Collective and Steam Design, and I give you the changing face of architecture. A round of applause, please, for those. And now it's for me to hand over to Sonia Watson. Thank you very much.
So I've been told, oh, that's good. Where's Diane? That's definitely in the right place. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. What an amazing event already. Ben has already done a number of the thank yous. I would like to add a few of mine. I'm going to do a bit better than Ben. I'm going to say the actual names of Manisha, Manisha Kelly. We have Diane Small. Anthony is here somewhere, Anthony Cumberbatch and AC Lab. Also, of course, thank you to Ben and to Alan Valance, who are really running this stellar organization. And this year is absolutely unprecedented and a real milestone in the relationship between the Stephen Lawrence Charitable Trust and the RIBA, because we are hosting no less than 3 events with their support, and in fact being driven by them to ensure that we are in a position to sustain and carry on the work that we do. And what is that work? Well, for those of you who don't know, and I never assume that everybody does, but the Stephen Lawrence Charitable Trust was founded in 1998 by Doreen Lawrence, obviously in honor and in memory of her murdered son, Stephen. Now, Stephen aspired to be an architect, and at the time that he was murdered, he had less than a 1% chance of fulfilling that professional career aspiration. I don't think it's much of a secret that 25 years later, his opportunity to become an architect is not much more than it was then. So this year, with the RIBA support, we will continue to do what we have been doing for the last 20 years to do something about that. And you only have to look around this room or indeed log on to our website, www.stephenlawrence.org.uk, to check out Building Futures. Building Futures has 250 alumni members. We are absolutely honored, and I can see lots of them today, yay, around the room. We have ensured that 130 young people from diverse backgrounds, and particularly from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds, have become fully qualified architects, and a number have their own practice. This year in 2018, we are absolutely delighted to have given out 22 bursaries to the class of 2018. Later on, you will see their work displayed behind me. That is unprecedented for any charity. All of it is from the generosity of those around me today and from this country. Going forward, as Ben has mentioned, the fundraiser tonight, the dinner that we have on the 29th of November, will also go towards continuing that work. We are also absolutely delighted to be talking to you today, having delivered £150,000 worth of fully sponsored architecture degrees around the country in selected universities, including De Montfort and the University of the West of England. So we continue that work as well. Tonight, I am also saying an absolute heartfelt thank you to the musicians behind us, to 204 Design Collective, who I'm going to hand over to shortly. We are absolutely looking forward to what will be an amazing evening. I have to give my personal thanks to my trustees who are sitting on the front row-ish, a little few on the row behind, without whose support we would not be celebrating what we are celebrating today, our best ever year. Next year, some of you will have heard, if you were at the service, that the Prime Minister announced that each year from April 2019 will henceforth be known from the 22nd of April as National Stephen Lawrence Day. Now, what that will mean is a national program going throughout schools and beyond to ensure that the legacy that is Stephen Lawrence's story helps to build the future and helps young people to make choices about what they choose to be and what they can aspire to be in his name, and using his story as inspiration. Before I move and hand over to Kate and Sarah, I have something to launch today, which is the most exciting thing ever. Well, 2 things, really. I'm going to ask Chelsea, who is sitting. Chelsea's my head of program. She does literally everything. All I do is sort of stand here asking for her. So here, for those of you who are or who know Part 1 architecture students and Part 1 graduates, from very shortly, log onto the website and you will see the trailer happening, but you can take a leaflet today in conjunction with London Marathon events for the first time ever in honor of the first Stephen Lawrence Day. There will be a national competition to design the 18-mile marker, which will be seen by 40,000 runners. Wait for it, I'm going to be one of them. I will be dragging myself around 26.2 miles somehow. But the important thing is, for portfolios, for work experience, for presentation, it is going to be an absolute winner. And that will be an incredible competition that will be launched very, very shortly. It will be free to enter. And Chelsea is right here, and her name is all over it, Chelsea at Stephen Lawrence, and she will make sure that you know all about it. We are absolutely delighted to offer that opportunity to those who may not get that sort of wonderful opportunity to build their portfolio that early in their architectural education. The other thing, very lastly, is that we are launching a Friends scheme, which you can also pick up a leaflet about, because in order to sustain our work, we have to make sure that those who support us have an opportunity to hear all about our work and to support it in some small way so that we can carry on ad infinitum, which is actually what our dream is. So without me saying too much more, thank you for listening and thank you for supporting the Stephen Lawrence Charitable Trust in conjunction with the RIBA, who have supported us now. I think this is our 13th year, which is unbelievable. And this year they are hosting not one, not two, but 3 events with us, with the team's help at the back, who are standing there waving at me now. Thank you, Manisha and Diane. To ensure that we can continue this legacy for a lot longer than I would be able to keep talking to you about it on this stage. So right now, I'm going to hand over to Kate and Sarah. Oh, I'm looking in the wrong direction. What? You were over there a minute ago. Who are actually going to host the evening and introduce the speakers from 204 Design Collective. I knew that, right? I know, I've got it. Thank you.
You weren't too far off, though, because that's another one of our members over there. She's throwing you off. It's my sister, so we kind of look alike. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Hello, and once again, welcome to the Stephen Lawrence Memorial Lecture. My name is Saira Abdurrahman. This is Kate Brock. We are the co-founders and co-creative directors of the 204 Design Collective. Additionally, in the crowd, like I said, my sister is sitting over there, Samira Abdurrahman. She's also our editor-in-chief. So she helps us a lot with concept development, and she helps us curate a lot of our projects and our website. So I'll also plug our website, www.the204designcollective.com. If you haven't already been there, check it out. So thank you again for having us tonight. We're honored to be here this evening with the Royal Institute of British Architects and the Stephen Lawrence Charitable Trust to honor Stephen Lawrence by working together towards establishing a more diverse, inclusive, and accessible architectural profession.
So to give you a better idea of exactly who we are, the 204 Design Collective started in 2014 as a small group of university students who felt the work they were producing was not reflective of the ideas and projects we were interested in. Feeling unrepresented and lacking the support and opportunities we desired, we founded the 204 as a collaborative design group to explore cities, politics, and culture through the lens of environmental design, in pursuit of a design practice that we felt reflected us, our communities, and our values.
Our work, in part, is fueled by our lived experiences, and it is shaped by the needs of our often underrepresented communities. In order to break down the power dynamics often encountered within the discipline, we work towards bridging the gap between theory and practice, connecting discourse with application and action. Through the medium of an online journal, which relies on the contribution from the community, we explore ideas, concepts, and theories that work to apply and feed into our designs. This journal lays the foundation for our projects, highlighting important and often unaddressed issues.
So to give you an example of some of the work that we do, this is an article from our online journal that we wrote in response to the Frieze Talk Alt Monuments at the Frieze Art Fair in September 2017. The topic was, how should we commemorate history in public? It called into question the existing statues that typically adorn our public squares, glorifying and monumentalizing morally reprehensible figures of the past. We thought the answer was quite obvious. This question assumes that the ideologies that these monuments uphold are somehow in the past. Even the use of the term infamous histories to describe the context in which these monuments were erected diminishes the very complex and often very violent social and political atmosphere of the time. When we chose to commemorate those who have committed atrocities by erecting a monument in the name and likeness in the middle of a public space, we sanction the erasure of the atrocity, its victims, and its lasting influence.
So it turns out that it wasn't so obvious, and the majority of the attendees and the panelists did not actually agree with us. So we published this response. So this collage features images of Hugh Locke's work titled Restoration, which was exhibited at the Frieze Art Fair, and we basically collaged it and layered it with tweets from Donald Trump, which he sent out following the Charlottesville rally over the Robert E. Lee statues that went up. So pushing these ideas forward, we entered a call for submissions that was put out by Historic England that were looking for proposals for new ways of remembering events, people, and identities in the public realm. Our proposal stands in stark opposition to the traditional male and militaristic style approach to monuments and to the importance that is given to them in public spaces. Our intervention proposed the inversion of the plinth. By excavating ground rather than elevating a statue, we are changing the dynamic of the way people interact with and understand memorial. Rather than a looming figure, the public is provided a new space to occupy and to activate.
So ideally, our process involves, first off, establishing theory and concept through the online journal. Second, design development and proposals through competitions. And finally, implementation and construction. Unfortunately, we did not win this design competition, but we will continue to submit and hopefully.
Keep on keeping on. So the next project we'd like to talk about is Decolonizing Architecture. So Decolonizing Architecture was included as the part of the core program at the 2018 London Festival of Architecture. Throughout the month of June, Decolonizing Architecture engaged with the theme of identity at the LFA, making a call for more diverse and inclusive cities in practice by exposing, deconstructing, and reforming the way that we learn, speak, and practice architecture. This was a new format for the 204, allowing us to collaborate and explore these ideas through a series of workshops, talks, and events that took place in London over the course of the month. So with a team of creatives, some of which are also here tonight, you'll meet some of them, Decolonizing Architecture led an interdisciplinary introspection into the profession, looking at architecture through the lens of colonial empires.
So following the success of our event series, we were invited here tonight on behalf of the Stephen Lawrence Charitable Trust and in collaboration with RIBA to co-curate tonight's event. Tonight will be a showcase and celebration of young creatives engaging with architecture and design. Our panelists have been invited to share their work demonstrating how the creative community explores, challenges, and redefines traditional architectural practices through interdisciplinary collaboration and fierce public engagement.
So as previously mentioned by some of the people who presented before, this year's lecture is titled The Changing Face of Architecture. We hope tonight to inspire more young people to practice architecture by exhibiting various methods and mediums to engage with it. In 2018, Architects Journal published that there are 12% Black, Asian, and minority ethnic architects working at AJ 100 practices in the UK and 33% women architects. The Architects Registration Board notes that in 2018, there are 26% registered women architects in Britain, and they do not actually publish the percentage of BAME architects. However, a few years ago, it was at 6%. It is important to remember that diversity is not a trend. If we are to design more inclusive and accessible cities and spaces, we in turn must establish a more inclusive and accessible profession that is led by and responsive to the needs of the community. So thank you again to RIBA and to the Stephen Lawrence Charitable Trust for inviting us here tonight. We're really humbled and excited to be here. Really pleased and very happy to see what the panel has to say and what's in store for all of us. So I'll give you a little bit of a breakdown on how the panel will be structured and some of the panelists that will be speaking tonight. So I will first introduce Kieran Yates, who is a journalist, and she is going to talk a little bit about some of the work that she does. She led one of our events at Decolonizing Architecture, actually, so she will talk a little bit about her work, and she'll also talk a little bit about the spatial application of some of the work that she does and how she covers that in her work. And then followed by that, we're going to have Selasi and Abigail, and they're part of the Future Architects Network, and so they're going to tell us a little bit about their work and their involvement with this organization. Followed by them, we're going to have Akil and Gam, in the front, Resolve Collective. And Resolve Collective is another architectural collective group, and they're going to talk a little bit about their work. They do a lot in Brixton, actually, in the borough of Brixton. So they'll talk a little bit about their connection to that community and some of the projects that they've been doing over there. And then closing us off is going to be Ahnansé of Steam Down. And he's going to talk to us a little bit as well about Steam Down, the work that they do in Deptford, and some of the spaces that they've been creating in order to play their music and create fun times for all of us. After this panel conversation, this panel presentation, there then will be a 20-minute discussion that will be led by our panel chair, Kieran Yates, and then we'll have about 15-20 minutes for question and answer from the audience to the panelists, because it's going to be so engaging. You're going to have so much to ask and say. So I think without further ado, please help me in welcoming our panel chair, Kieran Yates.
Oh, hello. Thank you so much for having us and allowing us to take up space. Perhaps, it might be easier if I stand, but my name is Kieran Yates. I'm a journalist and broadcaster, and I'm just sort of here to contextualize my work for you a little bit so you can sort of understand why I was asked to chair, I suppose, to talk about the work that I do, but also my work as a journalist, as somebody who makes zines, somebody who does this kind of work in a conceptual way. So a lot of my work is writing, is kind of speaking, and I am humbled and inspired by people who are using physical space to make this kind of difference. So yeah, it's an absolute pleasure to be around people who are confronting physical spaces straight up while I hide behind my computer. But yeah, what you're seeing up there is the front cover of my fanzine called British Values, which is a sort of satirical and political reaction to our current political and cultural climate of anti-immigrant rhetoric. So I've spent the last 10 years working as a journalist, predominantly for The Guardian, but also for various other places, writing about culture and politics. And 3 years ago, decided to try and decolonize the media space on my own by using being part of the fanzine radical print community that's existing in London, and it's really headed up by communities of colour, and it feels like a very exciting time and place to be writing, to be a journalist, to be an activist in London right now, which I'm sure you're going to hear more about later on. But yeah, British Values for me is just something that really talks about the terms used by government, terms that happen in government via political rhetoric, things that were used by, well, first by Tony Blair in 2001, later by David Cameron as Prime Minister, then trickled down to Theresa May as Home Secretary, and now has become policy, which is used in schools and education via the Prevent strategy, via the Home Office, via cultural and creative spaces. And the zine that I look at and the conversations we'll be having tonight is looking at how this kind of political rhetoric filters down into grassroots discussion. How does this inform the work that you make? How does this inform your cultural imprint? And how can this be a challenge to access spaces like architecture? When we had those statistics there about, I think, 6%, which is the only data that we have that is representative of BME, representatives of architecture, I think that we can all agree that there's a lot more work to be done there. So without further ado, I don't want to take up too much space to the people who are doing the real work, but we will be discussing these notions of decolonizing spaces, these notions of creating a network, and really what happens when you begin and you decide to reimagine spaces that don't yet exist. What might that be like? Thank you very much. That's just a little bit about me, and I will leave it to you guys to chat before we have a panel discussion. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Selasi, Setufe.
My name's Abigail, Patel.
So we are both trustees of the RIBA and currently sitting as council members. So our presentation today is really about a network we're calling the Future Architects Network. So the RIBA is the only major built environmental professional body, that does not have a group or network for students and graduates. So we've set about taking experience from our peers, from the surveying, town planning, and engineering sectors, to set up a network which is about a service for early career professionals in the RIBA.
So our hope is that the Future Architects Network will operate where the RIBA currently already operates. So, for example, in the regions, international chapters, and schools of architecture across the world. Ultimately, we're aiming to create a highly localized but interconnected global network for early career professionals. So, for example, I'm a master's student, Selasi is an associate graduate. It's for people like us to exchange ideas, skills, and our thoughts.
So earlier on this year, as representatives of the younger body of the profession, we were asked to be assessors on the Student Hardship Fund, and we were quite disheartened that a lot of students were facing a lot of hardship in universities as a result of high costs of field trips, creating of large-scale models, and unnecessary printing costs. We subsequently published an article in the AJ and the BD requesting universities to contact us and let us know what they're currently doing to try and subvert issues of student hardship in the different universities.
So understanding the disparity amongst universities and therefore how we can begin to address the existing gaps in the industry, in the funding of the hardship, is our primary goal. So as representatives of students and graduates ourselves, we think it's our job to put the issues and the needs of young people at the forefront in the conversations that we're having today in the RIBA, and ensure that we're creating opportunities for their voices to all be heard. Despite the open letter that we put out, we've so far had 9 out of 51 universities come back to us regarding the way that they subsidise, as Selasi's indicated already, the things that cause student hardship amongst university students. So I mean, we're really hoping that a lot more universities do get back to us soon. I think a lot of people are quite worried that we're going to kind of put this information out there and create competition amongst universities, but we're representing students, and it's about putting students first and their hardship and how can we help them. And it's not about the universities creating competition, it's how can we help students kind of mitigate the hardship and kind of how can we ensure that no young person is left behind, basically, when it comes to surviving their architectural profession?
So we're really encouraged by the thought of having a collective voice and the power of a collective voice. Together as in this network, the Future Architects Network, we are hoping to address more issues like this that affect students, that affects issues that affect graduates, and the issues that affect early year professionals. So currently,
so this diagram indicates a level of student representation that's currently operating across the different levels of the RIBA. So Selasi and I sat up at the top there, and then we also sit on the regional councils, kind of down. I can't read, I've not got my glasses on. So as well as the link to the Architect Students Network, which we're hoping to collaborate with this event. So clearly the level of representation across the organisation doesn't reflect the number of students we've got. We've got 15,000 students, and I think at the minute we've hardly got any student representation across the RIBA, so it really fails to reflect the collective voice that we have and the issues that really affect us day to day in our education.
I should also add, when we talk about students, we're also talking about graduates, because as you know, it's a very long course. So we're talking about part 1s in universities, but part 1s that are also out in the field working. We're talking about part 2s that are in university, as well as part 2s that are, in the field working. And then as myself as a part 3, who's not really associated with any university, creating the space, a collective voice for us all to be able to engage with, and all be able to engage with the institution and the wider profession. So this is more like the kind of, level of engagement and involvement through and through in all the different formats, all the different combinations that we would like to see. So instead of what you previously saw, like I say, we want it to be more connected and cutting across all sorts of levels, at regional level, at local level, at national level, and internationally as well. Our proposed structure ensures that young people will have greater opportunity to represent and to be represented across the profession, and creating more opportunity for them to influence the wider profession and the built environment.
Yeah, I think one of the key things is that we've learned from being in the RIBA is that when you have these discussions, I think it's natural to just take away the things that are relevant to you. So if there's not many student representation, if there's not a lot of diverse representation, those views and those conversations don't get carried through down to the local levels, down to like grassroots, schools of architecture. So we're really keen to change that. So our first event, for anyone who's helping and who wants to help set up our networks, that's students, educators, early career architects and young professionals. We really welcome everyone to come and attend our first annual assembly in Birmingham on the 3rd of November. The day will take place in the Jewellery Quarter with representatives from across the RIBA accredited schools. So we've kind of put out an open call. Anyone who wants to come, please do. We'll spend the afternoon in workshops dealing with specific issues that the network would like to address. For example, the cost of education, which we've touched on already, the future of the profession, mental health and well-being, digitalization, interdisciplinary work, etc. By the end of the day, we will have developed a detailed business case to use to establish the network internationally. And of course, in the evening, there'll be a party.
So to wrap it all up, as a summary, the Future Architects Network is about empowering young people in the industry to have their say on issues that are important to them, with a vision of making meaningful and positive change through a collective voice and collective action. Students, graduates, and young professionals are already changing the course of the profession, as you will see from the work that people are doing, and as you hear from the panel. And they're already doing that, but then coming together and demanding a platform and being proactive to develop this will just further that work and help us really change the course of architecture and the face of architecture. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Akil and Gam from Resolve Collective. Thanks.
You're going to stand up there. Just pass the mics between. How's everyone doing? You all right? Sounds quiet. It's not like you've got to give a talk in front of 150 people, is it? It's a real honor to be speaking with all of you today. The bulk of this presentation is going to be about our design work. But before that, Akil and I are both 25, born in 1993 in London, and like many young black families, and some of you in the audience today likely, grew up in the aftermath of the Stephen Lawrence murder. There's so much to say here, but I'll suffice to say thank you to Doreen Lawrence and the Stephen Lawrence Trust for making our experiences, our brothers and sisters' experiences, and our generation's experiences of growing up in the UK safer and more equitable. On to the design. So we're the co-founders of Resolve, which is an interdisciplinary design collective using engineering, architecture, art, and technology to address social issues. Today, we want to talk through a few of our projects and discuss the notion of architectural design processes as a means to interrogate various social issues.
So, for our inaugural project, the context was the London Design Festival 2016. Brixton's second time ever as part of it, and one of those crazy hot summers where Gan and I had all the time in the world and nothing to do. Using only materials sourced from within a mile radius of the site, St. Matthew's Church Gardens in Brixton, we created a platform that would connect and produce new knowledges and ideas, bringing together a variety of people, disciplines, and projects into a space that was free, that was inviting, but also unfamiliar and evocative, a space that was once vernacular and spectacular. We hosted 8 days and nights of events with 9 different collaborators and a different artist exhibition every morning. Some of the events ranged from performances to poetry recitals, film screenings, to just straight-up parties. Engagement was something that we were really keen on and was key to the project, But given the short time frame and the limitations of a highly contested site, we needed to reimagine and think about all the ways in which engagement was possible implicitly and explicitly. This meant not only conducting workshops with young people to design elements of the pavilion, but really simple things like building out in the middle of the park all day, building with the people that were already there. Importantly, we also designed the structure to be semi-permeable. All the walls were doors, so the pavilion was never truly open and never truly closed. No one was entirely left in or entirely kept out.
So our next project was called If These Walls Could Talk, which is a nod to a song by the great Kendrick Lamar of Compton, California. Walls as fundamental architectural elements have long been archetypes of separation. They divide our homes, our cities, and nations. They are pervasive, just as physical as they are metaphorical. They're everywhere. Today, with most of Earth's population living in cities and in closer proximity than ever, separation, exclusion, and marginalization are still some of our most pressing issues. Addressing this, we ask the question, what if walls weren't so divisive? What if walls could bring us together? This vision demands a radical methodological shift in practice to build by deconstructing the notion of the wall, an excavation of the processes that lead to their divisiveness. It posits a future of architecture where debate, collaboration, and inclusion are integral to how we design, and where changes in process, people, and perspectives can reveal a collective sense of fairness, community, and belonging. Over 3 days, we worked with 8 school children from a school in the deprived area of East London to create a physical model. They controlled all aspects from the budget to the aesthetic, all in an educational environment. We think addressing these social issues in a design sense through a design challenge is an implicit way in which architecture can be used as an educational approach to interrogate social issues. So we exhibited at Stockwell Festival, where the public could interact with the young people's design, as well as the deeper social question.
So for this project, we wanted to explore the notion of market value, specifically trying to reimagine and celebrate the social, cultural, political, and environmental value in urban markets, the kind that sell fruit and veg, not stocks and shares. In today's increasingly valorized cities, we use over 300 recycled banana boxes from the market and the surrounding sites, and we sought to create, in the passageway between 2 spaces in Brixton Market, a space for discussion, for workshops and events that creatively addressed issues of gentrification, food production, trade, and consumption. Co-opting the boxes, an essential element of market infrastructure, to reimagine the interior structure of the space, work to both celebrate the aesthetics of global interconnectivity and critique some of the more exploitative aspects and colonial aspects of food trade and production. Events in the space followed suit, growing organically with the accumulation of the boxes. We had some really amazing events in the space, such as a food journey workshop with Mama D, a collaborative launch event with Dapper Chocolates, a Ghanaian vegan food, chocolate company, and Samosa Shack, who are a Pakistani samosa company as well. Check them both out. We also exhibited work by Shola Olulode, Titus Akira, and our boy Vishnu J. It hosted performances by the legendary Lloyd Coxon, that was a man night. And then also, Omis Mahmoud the fourth, we had Lula XYZ, who also performed with Steam Down sometimes. We had some really amazing times, and that was great.
So this February, we presented at a conference called Future Architecture Platform in Slovenia, and it opened a number of opportunities for us in Europe, with an installation at Haus der Kultur und der Welt in Berlin being one of them. So on October the 13th, for the Forecast Festival, we're exploring the subtle yet subversive ways in which inequality permeates our society. We're looking specifically at Schelling's simple segregation model, which is a grid of colored squares, where each square represents a human. Schelling's great insight was that even in a society of only mildly biased individuals, we can create super segregated cities.
And so for this installation, we're trying to take a multi-scalar approach to reconception and the interrogation of Schelling's model by folding macrostructures into micro ones, by turning the intangible tangible, and by rarefying an extraction. We are attempting to create a dynamic space of interacting, a space composed of 1,000 plastic crates. In the appropriation of Schelling's grid, we're exploring the qualitative material conditions of quantitative space. A simulative world of very real experiences of separation told artistically through poetry, through music, through storytelling, but also through the participants' bodies, by sitting, by clambering, by pondering, and by conversing. So, to end, since we grew up in the era of pirate radio and grime DVDs, we can't really be up here without giving the shout-outs to the crew then. So, but this is also a way, as well as the shout-outs, of shouting out all the people that have helped us so far, and we couldn't even get all the people on this board. But as well as that, it's also positing what it means for us to change the face of architecture. For us, architecture and design are just some of the tools in an inquisitive and investigative process. It's a process that also necessitates collaboration and co-production, not just between architects and designers, but practitioners from all disciplines, and importantly, from no discipline at all. We weren't even able to fit all the people that we want to shout on this page, let alone say them all, but a good 70% of these faces aren't architecture. Perhaps the concern has to be not just the face of architecture, to put a black face on white skin, but to reevaluate architecture's body and its organs and all the things that depend on it and that is always depended on, that are assumed to be outside of its remit, of its disciplinary remit. And that can start right here, right now. There's such a wealth of talent out here, and the opportunities out there for collaboration are limitless. I always say to Gam, and I say to Seth, who's our third member, that right now we're living in a new renaissance. You know, the Langston Hughes, the Zora Neale Hurstons, the Archibald Motleys, you know, they're all here, you know what I'm saying? They're all W. Du Bois, they're all here. They're all here with us right now. And through collaboration, it's through collaboration that we'll realize that event and that will change that face. Imagine designing an archive with Ted Adelaide, with Eke Sewell. Imagine a community theatre with Anu Enriquez from Skin Deep. Imagine making a school of music with Ahnansé, with Touch and Bass, with Nubaya Garcia. It's crazy.
Big up Wayne.
So for us, change starts not just with different faces, but with the differences in the people behind them.
Yeah, I mean, some of the people aren't in this room, some of them are. And we just wanted to say a few shout-outs. You know, shout out Mark, M-A-R-K, plus N-E-B-A, that's Neebs, Hani Alish, Hold Tight You, and the 3.09 crew, Adrian LaHoo, Joseph 2, Neil Pinder, bust a couple man through.
Yeah.
Listen, like The Godfather, Hold Tight, Finn Harper, Public Practice straight after. That's a quick 8-bar for your head tart. Thank you very much, appreciate it.
Thank you so much for that. Finally, can we please call up Ahnansé from Steam Down?
Hello, how's everybody doing? Okay, I'm gonna do what we do at Steam Down. When I say eyes, you say here. Eyes. That's not good enough. But while we start, okay, so this is welcome to Steam Down. Eyes. Okay, that's better. There's a reason for this, and it comes down to how spaces are used, particularly music spaces and gig spaces, which is, we have a habit of having I guess, a preconceived notion of what's going to happen in that space. We say eyes at Steam Down as a means to bring focus, and you know, sometimes when we play music that people dance to, they kind of like to chat, and we kind of rein it in by having that kind of cause. So I think that kind of changes, I guess, on the first hand, how we approach space, but I'll get into that a bit later. So I'm going to talk a bit about Steam Down, and then I guess about how we were looking at spaces and trying to find spaces for us to kind of build this music community that we're building. And then finally, the kind of intersection of like the multiple identities that we hold, I guess being in the diaspora, but being born here, and how, I guess, how does identity fit within that, within contemporary London? So there's a few pictures about Steam Down, kind of what we do, giving you a picture of the event. So this is Buster Mantis in Deptford, where we started this just over a year ago. not that long ago. It's a creative space and it's a bar. It's owned by a guy called Gordon. He's a Jamaican heritage, and I guess Buster Mantis was the Prime Minister of Jamaica. So I guess it was quite fitting, seeing as our name of our event. I'm going to go back, Steam Down. It's from a Caribbean dish or a Grenadian dish called Oil Down, and in it has all of these different ingredients, and it's a melting pot of all of these things. It happens on a Sunday. Generally, lots of people get together, kind of the idea for the event. So we thought of Buster Mantis, at least their food would get us close to that goal, as well as the space. So it's built, or the venue is hosted in these arches in Deptford, underneath a railway. And I'm going to move on. And this is what it looks like from the inside. So this is the side of one of the two arches where we host our Wednesday weekly night. This is what it looks like with a few people in it when it's kind of empty. That's what it was like for the first couple of weeks when we started. And that was what it was like maybe 3 weeks ago or something like that. So kind of a big change of people, coming through, which is amazing. And this is the kind of Steam Down Arts Collective, some of them that are in the house here today. So I had the idea for, I'm going to leave it there. I had the idea for starting Steam Down many, many years ago, and it's kind of a project that has come into being over time, and it's been all about how do you create community and spaces for people to come together, and how do we use that for positivity, how do we change the way music is applied within our societies, and how can it be used as a positive force. And that's going to go into, I guess, the part of identity. And when I was growing as a musician, I was in the conservatoire, I went to Trinity College of Music, and then I also, had my second university, which was playing with a lot of West African musicians. And the two experiences were completely different, and how that music was applied in society, and also how the spaces were constructed for that music to exist were kind of vastly different. In music college, you learn your scales and your arpeggios and all of these kinds of things. And, you go to a club or a bar, something like Buster Mantis or Ronnie Scott's, one of these places, and you play. Whereas with the kind of West African musicians, the music had this social purpose. One of the kora players I had a privilege playing with came from a line of 74 generations of kora players, which is amazing. And I was, had all of these questions about how I was completely miffed. Anyway. And through that period of learning with this musician, I realized that there was a use for music which I hadn't yet perceived, and it was really about how can music be used for healing, for transformation. And that's going to bring me back to kind of spaces that we use music in. So Buster Mantis is kind of a halfway house, say, for where we are currently. On one hand, it has a relationship to, I guess, my Caribbean heritage and some of the heritages of the group that we're in. But on the other hand, it's a bar, and when we go into most bars and you hear music in bars, we come in with a kind of, I don't know, I call it bar psychology, a way of approaching the space, a way which our behaviors are conditioned before we have even heard what is going to happen. So we have a kind of challenge in finding spaces where we can fully kind of explore these ideas of how is healing, how do these ancient concepts of like the griot of Mali, how are they applied in today's day and age. So one of the things which would happen within Mali or across that whole region would be when somebody performed, if you appreciated what they did, you would donate something, so it would be an exchange. So one of the things we've done to kind of challenge how the space is used is have contributions, not donations, as a means of exchange, and that completely changes how people access the space and kind of changes what that bar space is, I guess, and how we see it. Another thing that we kind of look at doing, I guess, is not having a stage. So say, for instance, the band is on the floor. So we kind of look at how do we not create a barrier between the audience and us, and then what does that do for the music and what does that do for the performance? That's going to bring me on to, let me just have a look at my notes quickly. I guess some of the things that bars, say, for instance, have when we go into some of these kind of conditioned behaviors would be, I guess, consumption of alcohol is one of those main things. And that is really not conducive for healing. So we're constantly fighting, okay, when you walk into a bar, I'm expecting to drink something, you know. And it generally, in those spaces, it's seen as a kind of, I guess, escapism from our kind of daily lives. Whereas, I guess in the more traditional form, it would be used maybe for a more ritualistic context, even talking about politics, talking about everything in our daily lives and really confronting those things. And I think it is very challenging to start bringing some of these ideals into spaces that have preconceived notions. So our constant challenge is how do we find spaces and how do we build spaces? And this is an open question to the audience because I'm not an architect. How do we build spaces for these alternative means of applying music or applying creativity as a whole? And on one hand, that is looking to the future, and on another hand, it is also a decolonial process, since these are kind of maybe more ancient ideas that haven't found their way into modern society, and across the diaspora, you find that they haven't made their way into contemporary society. So I think one of the things that we're trying to do is to bring these things kind of back to the forefront. I could go on, but I think I'm going to leave it there. Yes. She said to cut it off. Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you to everybody that's put the event on.
Thank you very much. Can I ask the panelists to take a seat on the stage? Yeah, sorry, you're not done yet. Yeah. And we're just going to have a little bit of a discussion that's going to be led by Kieran. A 10-minute discussion.
Okay. Can you hear me? Can you guys hear me or not? Hello?
Test one.
Hello? Okay. So thank you so much. Thank you for that. And just another quick thank you to RIBA for having us. And thank you to the Lawrence family for continuing to fight and for inspiring a generation, some of which I'm joined by this evening, who continue to fight in their own respective ways. And it is absolutely my pleasure to be joined by all of you. So thank you very much. Can we just have a round of applause for the panelists? Because I'm a journalist who's from the outside, and I'm a fan of all of your work respectively, so it's nice for me. I guess the first place that I'd like to start is seemingly conceptual, but with real world answer. This idea of the quest to reimagine space or reimagine something that hasn't existed yet, that we haven't seen before. If you're working with that practice in mind, what is the thing that you would like to see that does not yet exist, that you're working towards in your practice? To all of you guys.
Well, for us, it's not even really that conceptual. Like, so we have a project in Loughborough Junction underneath the arches, very similar to how Steam Down is. And we've been lucky enough to get to the final stages of this project. And if we do, what we really try to get, as well as a kind of adaptable structure that can fit into all these different arches, we really want to weave it into the community network in there. And also, it's really heavily influenced by what's going on right now in the London music scene. Mm-hmm. So, like, I think we were at the first Steam Down. Gam and I, we were at the first, like a bit more than a year ago, we were at the first one. So, like, that, and the slides didn't communicate that, but, like, when you go there, you feel like you're in, like, a Jacob Lawrence painting, you know what I'm saying? It's crazy. It's the amount of energy that's in that room is insane, and it really influenced us. And just to see all of our peers, you know, out here performing, people call it like a renaissance of jazz, a renaissance of this, a renaissance of that, and it's like, but I think space is really key in that conversation, and there is no central space, and there are no spaces that are permanent. They're only temporary, they're only ephemeral, they're only precarious, and so that's really what we were trying to do, and so that actually is a project for us. So we want to see like a kind of, I don't know, like a South London School of Jazz or some shit like that, like some crazy, I don't know.
What about for you, Abigail, with the work that you're doing, kind of trying to diversify in terms of breaking the gender pay gap and that sort of stuff? Because this is a world, a female-centric architectural world that hasn't existed yet in a form.
Yeah, I think... Sorry, can you rephrase the question? What was the initial question?
Just tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing with the gender pay gap.
Yeah, so I think that's come about maybe in the last few years, as I've kind of, the last few years of my education, when, where I grew up, there was no kind of gender discrimination in my family. You know, my mum had a really important job just as much as my dad, and then you get to university and then there's more or less equal representation there, but then you go into a job and it starts to realize that maybe not everything's as squeaky clean as you actually think. So I started looking into the gender gap in architecture, more specifically this year, the gender pay gap, because obviously we've got new legislation that we're talking about every year in April. And I think that really brought home for me some of the things that people aren't surprised to hear about, that you know, these things, we're not shocked by some of the statistics that we're hearing, but I think it should be a wake-up call to people in the profession to say, you know, this isn't okay, this is something that we need to change. And for me, the research that I'm doing is also leaning towards looking at ethnicity pay gap. So for me, you know, as a mixed-race young woman, it's interesting for me to see that whilst there's also a gender pay gap as a woman, there's also, you know, gaps within that, within ethnicity and stuff like that. So, yeah, that's what I'm looking at.
And what about for you, Selasi, with the stuff that you're doing with the Future Network?
So my response to that has been to galvanize other people who are like me, thinking like me, and have happened to come across familiar faces and set up a group called the Black Females in Architecture. And through that, we really want to start to sort of make ourselves seen, because like Abigail was saying, it's very difficult. It doesn't seem like a problem until you're right in the thick of it and you're all of a sudden realizing that it's either you try and stay and sort of fight and try and find your way through the system in order to do the kind of great work that you want to do, in order to create the amazing spaces that you want to create. You can't even get your foot in the door to be able to try and do that. So the purpose through the group that we've set up is to try and make ourselves seen and collectively, you know, access some of these, you know, whether it's competitions or whatever, and make connections with people who are actually able to do these things, and, you know, shine light on the issues that some people are facing that is just kind of swept under the rug. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. I think that notion of, especially with what you're doing, Ahnansé, with the emotional connection with a space, is really striking. I've been to Steam Down once, and what it really made me think about was my first relationship with architecture without realizing it, which I'm sure you will understand. Somebody who grew up in council housing in a tower block with very thin walls, hearing music next door, which totally affected the way that I now hear music. So how important was it to you to kind of bring that emotional nostalgia of your first experience with a space, or how important is it to emotionally connect with a space for you? How important is it to emotionally connect with the space for you?
I think it's crucial. I think every space has an imprint, and it colors how you perceive the music and also how the audience perceives the music. And I really think about this quite a lot, like as playing in multiple spaces. So if I play in the Barbican, the response to the music is completely different than if I'm playing in, let's say, Coco in Camden. Completely different. So the emotional response that you get from being in particular spaces, you know, as I was talking about, you know, not having a stage, say for instance, we're on the same level, it automatically means that you're not an audience member. And we kind of like to think about it as people participating or co-participating and co-creating with what we're doing. And it's very inclusive for everybody. So something like Bustamantis has, been the vehicle for that.
Yeah, the reason I asked the question is because, of course, in the last few months, there's been a lot of discussion around the power of a name and a history of a space. So if you haven't read about Colston Hall and its name change, which was a part of activism done by local Bristolians, owing to the Colston name having a history in the slave trade in that area, there's been a lot of discussion about how names like Colston Hall and many others across the UK may need to be reimagined, something else. Do you think that the way is to decolonize these existing spaces, or it is to create our own, for all of you?
I think that in terms of, I think we are creating our own spaces, and one of the things that's really exciting is seeing other collectives. So we did the Rebel Space in 2016, which was a space where I guess we felt that we could share kind of ideas and a space that we felt was our own. 3.09 are a really great collective that I think their installation's currently on.
Right now. Right now. Party there tomorrow.
Yeah, we're doing a party there tomorrow. We've got about 7 people attending on Facebook. So, but it's a different physical space, but it represents the same thing, which is about kind of emerging designers having a platform to create something. I think that in a sense is perhaps decolonial.
Yeah, how is that where the discussion is going in the sort of architectural world? I'm interested to know.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of what Rosa said. Rosa Yohanuda, who was at the last of the 204 talks, and someone that I grew up with, and it was talking about with these temporary spaces. All we do is temporary spaces, by the way. That's all we can do. But is that out of necessity? Are we doing that because we have no other option? Are we doing that because that's all we're allowed to almost do? And is it seceding, is it cresting by not being able to build these physical spaces? I think it's all well and good changing the name of the V&A to whatever you want to call it. You call it the Langston Hughes Museum. It's the bricks, it's the architecture, it's the structures. The structures are historical, the structures are socio-economic, and those structures don't change just because you change the name or just because you change the face. So I think it's really important to understand. And in doing the little temporary spaces, even though it is seceding to some extent, it's expressive. You're allowed to break a lot of boundaries, you're allowed to break a lot of laws, you're allowed to do a lot and really express yourself in those spaces. But I think the ultimate aim has to be to deconstruct the existing ones. It has to be to deconstruct what's going on and what leads to those existing ones. Not just to smash the building down, you know what I'm saying, but just like to actually reverse or to actually change and intervene in the process that makes these buildings in the first place.
Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think to pick up on something else Akil said, is it a case of that's what we're allowed to do, that's all we can do at this point in time? I feel like as young people in the profession, we're not really given as much opportunity to really engage or really, go out and do what we might want to be able to do, unlike how it was done in generations past where, when cathedrals were built by people that were just starting out in their career, yes, they had support from mentors or whatever, but that kind of system doesn't really exist anymore. There's a lack of sort of support for younger people in the profession, which then prohibits you from really exploring and really deconstructing, like you say, and trying to find a way to exist in that environment means that a lot of people who are doing amazing work are doing sort of temporary stuff, and we're not really able to deal with the real issues. A lot of what needs to change is fundamental change, but we're not really able to access and make any of those changes because the systems at play won't allow.
And what do you mean when you say the systems in play won't allow?
So with temporary spaces, as Akil was saying, you're allowed to sort of break some laws or just skirt around, what's allowed to be done and what's not. But we've come so far in, what's allowed these systems to be at play. And I think the UK is renowned for being one of the places with such stringent rules and regulations and all these things that sort of stop and prevent sort of open and free development in terms of architecture and creating space that is. There's so many limitations and not enough support for young professionals to be able to really explore. It's an exploratory thing to be able to think about space, think about what it can be, whether it's through music, like Asante, like Steam Down and other collectives like that are doing. It's a really hard thing to do if you're not allowed to really engage with those spaces and are limited by all sorts of different constraints.
So sorry, we're going to have to cut it short and open it up to questions from the audience.
All right.
Sorry.
No,
Sorry
that's
to
fine.
interrupt.
No worries.
Are there any questions?
Thank you. Hello, thank you. Hi, all of you on the panel, and I've enjoyed listening to you. I wanted to know, as being, young, impressionable people in the architecture field and, the shaping of space, what do you think design and architecture, what's its biggest power? What kind of instruments or tools can you use architecture to do to change society today? Which do you think, just to narrow it down, what is the most important thing architecture can do to change society today?
I'm laughing because I had a conversation. When I was in Graz, I used to have we're having this conversation all the time. What's the most important thing an architect can do? What's the most important thing architecture can do? And I mean, I'm not right, or who knows what it is, but I was saying I think the most important power for an architect is to say no. A lot of the time, we're co-opted, or designers are co-opted into systems, and you're being made complicit with the same systems that, as a black woman, are oppressing you. And this is revolutionary talk. I'm not saying this from the pulpit. It's like, this is actually just a plain truth. And sometimes it's to realize how complicit you are in doing that by agreeing, by acquiescing. So I think the most powerful thing an architect can do is to say no. Honestly, it's to not architect.
Is there another question from the audience? Actually, it has to be the last one, too. One in the back. I'm not going to run, I'm sorry. I'll try it.
Hi, so this kind of goes back to your comments. So you said the architect needs to say no a bit more, but I think from working in practice and from what a lot of people experience is that the architect's no is not a big enough no. Like, when you look at how our cities are formed and how, like, this, in terms of the hierarchy of the architect, we're actually quite low. So we actually don't have a lot of say. So how would you go about changing that in the future? How would you make the architect's no a bigger no?
As a disclaimer, I don't know the answer. But I would also say, in terms of hierarchy, you've got to think about it in parallel to other discussions. Is that the same reason why you don't litter? Because I'm not a big corporate or conglomeration, so that I don't, I'm choosing not to. Every individual, no matter where you are in any kind of political or social hierarchy, your power to not do something, your power to not throw something on the floor, your power to not be a misogynist, your power to not say something, is really key, no matter where you are. So it really is a question of conflating different scales. I don't know what an architect can do to be back on the top. I think architecture for me is stuck in this really stupid discussion where it's about, why can't we be like the 20th century architects, like Le Corbusier, like Frank Le Corbusier, and you look at them as figureheads, as fountainheads of, the profession, and that the one person was able to be at the top and do all this stuff. But I don't know if that was ever really the case. I wasn't around, so I don't know. But I don't think it was. And I feel like it was actually always just a system, and there was always a system to be played. There were always people at the bottom, there were always people at the top. But ultimately, the hierarchy that architects are in, and I see that, I do see that. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist. I think it's something to be unseen. If you can't physically break from that structure, there's some slight things you can do, maybe. When your developer is telling you to put in the portal for the social housing, maybe put up more of a fight. When they're trying to, like, not put enough money into S106 or something. There are creative ways to get around those arguments. There are bureaucratic ways, like Finn Williams always talks about bureaucracy of design, and those are kind of the ways in which we need to start engaging. We need to start engaging in order to change them, you know? So that's what I was saying.
Thank you. So, as the evening is coming to close, I just want to say another huge thank you to RIBA and to the Stephen Lawrence Memorial Trust. Stephen Lawrence Memorial Trust, sorry. Yeah. Thank you so much for continuing, thank you so much for continuing the work that you do and for inspiring us all tonight and always and beyond for the past 25 years and beyond. I really wanted to just share something. In the first event that we had at Decolonizing Architecture, we had 2 Indigenous architects come from Canada, and we wanted to just kind of give a Canadian perspective on talking about what decolonization in Canada would mean. And when he was sharing his work, he was always really critical about the work that he was showing. You know, oh, this angle's a little bit off, or oh, this building doesn't look quite right. And then he stopped himself and he was like, you know, I'm sorry, my work is awkward because it doesn't yet know what it is. And so I think that really stayed with me for so long, and it feeds into what Kieran's talking about. How do you reimagine spaces or places that don't yet exist? And so for all the young people here who are just starting their careers out in architecture and don't yet see a place for yourself, or don't yet see how your practice might unfold, don't be afraid to show awkward, bizarre, underdeveloped work. You know, this is the work that, you know, we're being inspired by Stephen Lawrence today, and we're pushing for a new world, and we won't stop. We'll do another 25 years. So the night's not over. The bar is open. Steam Down is going to be performing very shortly, and there's also stage design that was provided by the 204 Design Collective in collaboration with Nadim and Brother Portrait of Steam Down. So please stick around. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all the speakers. We're just going to clear some of the chairs at the back so we're ready for the performance to start in about 20 minutes. Food will also be served now, so help yourself to a drink. And if you're sitting at the back, if you wouldn't mind just walking to another part of the room, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Please don't leave. We've got such an amazing surprise for you guys. Some food prepared by AC Lab, which is African Caribbean cuisine, and also Steam Down. So mingle amongst yourself, help us by keeping the space clear. And the main thing is like, it's time